for next Tuesday to be our exam, and that covers chapters 18 and 19 only. One essay question on that exam next Tuesday will be the blood flow through the heart. That includes both pulmonary and systemic flows. So just keep in mind that's just a guaranteed essay question. You can go ahead and study that. There's a list in your course pack with all the structures the blood passes through. And all you have to do is just take that and list it on the exam next Tuesday.
And Tuesday's the first? Tuesday's
the first.
What page is that on?
I'll have to look and see. 39. That sounds about right. Yeah. 39 is right. Alright, so Tuesday's test is 60 multiple choice questions. There are 4 essays. One of those 4 essays is guaranteed to be that blood flow question. So go ahead and plan for that and make sure you're good to go. It is a 4-point question, so it's an easy way to guarantee at least 4 points from those essays, right? There are 104.5 points built onto this test, so hey, every little bit helps, right? So that's a guaranteed question for you. All right, so what I wanted to ask you was, did you have any questions about last class period? We were actually in the middle of a thought when class let out on Thursday of last week. So I want to get you back into talking about blood pressures and things of that sort. We had stopped talking on the bottom of page 55, so I thought I'd just start you back there. Just to give you a quick review where we were talking last Thursday, we talked about blood flow and resistances to blood flow. You might recall that peripheral resistance comes in 3 forms. Blood viscosity is the thickness of the blood, and depending on how many red blood cells you have in your blood, that actually can either make your blood thicker and more resistant to flow, or it can actually, what we call, thin up your blood and make it less resistant to flow. Vessel length is also something we talked about. The length of the vessel would be like sucking a milkshake through a garden hose in comparison to sucking a milkshake through a regular straw. So the length of the vessel actually makes a difference for the amount of resistance that flow encounters. Alright, and last item there is vessel diameter. What if we decrease the vessel diameter? Does that sound like vasoconstriction or vasodilation? Good. Decrease the diameter sounds like vasoconstriction. If you relax that blood vessel, we call that vasodilation. So the size of the blood vessel is going to be important here for the amount of blood that we can transport through.
What controls the diameter of blood vessels?
Vasomotor center.
Vasomotor center?
Vasomotor center, yeah. I'll put that up here for you.
And that's in the MO?
What's that?
That's in the medulla oblongata.
It is, it's in the medulla.
Medulla oblongata?
Yeah, in the brain. We had looked in here last Thursday at the IP10 CD that came with your textbook, and what they were showing us on that IP10 was if you decrease the vessel diameter and you're trying to get the same amount of blood to flow through, then what you have to do to the pressure behind that blood? Increase the pressure. So the pressure is going to be changing dependent on the vessel diameter. So this is actually one way we can modify our blood pressure is to modify that vessel diameter. So that's kind of where we left off in here last Thursday, was looking at vessel diameter, blood pressure, and the vasomotor center's control of that vessel diameter. Okay. Down near the bottom of your page, we had left off talking about a definition for blood pressure. And blood pressure is the amount of force that's behind the blood pushing against the walls of your vessel. So you'll notice here that blood pressure is measured in millimeters of mercury. So when we talk about blood pressure in the aorta, we're talking about like 120 millimeters of mercury. What is blood pressure in a vein?
Much less.
Much less. Approaching zero in a vein. So that pressure is the amount of force the blood exerts against the walls of the vessel. And you'll notice on your worksheet there are two main factors that influence blood pressure. All right. Those two main factors are peripheral resistance, which we just got through talking about, and cardiac output. You'll notice that cardiac output is the main determinant of your blood pressure.
Does it really get down to zero in the vena cava?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. Coming back in the right atrium is pretty much zilch. Yeah. All right, so thinking back to our blood chapter, what is cardiac output for the average person?
About 5 liters.
About 5 liters. Yeah. About 5 liters of blood. So, you know, females we talked are somewhere between 4 and 5. Males are somewhere between 5 and 6, so on average we're looking at about 5 liters of blood. That's our cardiac output. So your blood volume here is the major determinant of your blood pressure. Peripheral resistance we just got through talking about is another factor that, you know, plays a role here with our cardiac output, or sorry, with our blood pressure. Things like vessel length, vessel diameter, and here again the blood viscosity are going to be those issues. But the main determinant here is going to be that cardiac output. This picture comes from your textbook. I'll give you a page number here. On the top of page 629, they have a picture similar to this one. And at the bottom of page 55, let's talk about the drop in blood pressure from the aorta down to the vena cava. Notice the variation in the aorta here between 80 and 120. You've heard of those numbers before, right? What is 120 normally associated with?
Systole?
Systole or systole, good. What about the 80? Diastole or diastole. So that's why we get this yo-yo effect between 80 and 120. It depends on if the ventricles are in diastole or systole. But so notice any way you look at it, we're starting with high pressure in the aorta. In fact, that's the highest pressure vessel in our body. That aorta has to be strong yet stretchy to accommodate for that high blood pressure. Watch the drop off.
Nice.
Arteries drop off that pressure a little bit. Notice by the time we reach the arteriole, that pulsating pressure difference between diastole and systole is pretty much minimized. So we're getting a constant pressure in the arteriole. Watch when you enter the arteriole. I'm guessing somewhere about 65 millimeters of mercury pressure when you enter an arteriole. All right, when you end or leave that arteriole, wow, look, you've dropped over 40 millimeters of mercury of pressure from the entrance into an arteriole to the time that you leave an arteriole. That's a huge drop in pressure. In fact, we say that our biggest drop in pressure is in those arterioles. Why the arterioles? What's going on in there? They can constrict or they can relax, right? They're the ones that are regulating blood pressure to an extent because we do have some muscle in the walls of those arterioles. And besides, you know, we've pretty much lost all the oomph behind the pressure coming off of the heart. So you're going to see the most marked drop in pressure coming through those arterioles. Notice the capillaries. Capillaries are our smallest blood vessels. Notice when the blood pressure enters the capillary, we're somewhere between 20 and 30 for blood pressure. Notice by the time you leave a capillary, getting near to zero, aren't we? So blood pressure actually continues to drop in the capillaries. Notice the venules and the veins and the vena cava. We are dropping off to zero pressure. By the time that blood returns back to the heart in the right atrium from systemic flow, we're pretty much filling with no blood pressure. We started so great, didn't we? But it just dropped off to nothing. So you can see that by the time we leave our capillaries and enter that venous system, we're pretty much looking at no blood pressure behind that blood at all.
If there's no pressure, how's it moving?
Good question. 3 good ways. One way is just your motions, just moving about. Your skeletal muscle activity actually helps to milk the flow back toward the heart. That's one way to do it.
Thoracic.
Thoracic cavity, good. Breathing, if you take a deep breath of air, it lowers the pressure in your thoracic cavity and it pulls blood back up to your heart. What's the third mechanism? Valves, good. So in addition to the respiratory pump and the muscular pump, we also have valves that enlarge your veins. What do those valves prevent? Backflow, good. So we're looking at preventing that blood from pooling and draining down into our veins and backflowing.
You're talking about the valves of the heart?
Actually, no, there's valves in the veins.
Oh, valves and veins?
Valves in big veins, and it works the same way. They close off and prevent blood from backflowing. You might hear the veins called a blood reservoir, and that means that a lot of our blood is actually somewhat stored in our veins because since there's low pressure there, there's not any real great impetus to getting that blood back to the heart except for your physical activity, your breathing in those valves. So that's why we say that we do have a supply of blood that's actually out there in circulation in those veins. We call those veins our blood reservoir for that reason. It's kind of like a backup blood supply.
The book said 65%, but
65.
it doesn't seem like it could be that much.
I know that's a lot of blood that's out there in circulation.
Sure is.
What we just talked about is found over on page 56. I got a little graph similar to this one on page 56 for you. And we just talked about the respiratory pump and the muscular pump. So, you asked a very good question here to lead me into that page. Let's hit the bottom of the page because this takes our info a step further. Go back a bit. Alright, down at the bottom of the page, factors affecting blood pressure. Well, we know that blood pressure is kind of dependent on two things. It's going to be dependent on cardiac output. Cardiac output is the main determinant of our blood pressure. PR is peripheral resistance. So you'll notice the second portion of that equation depends on the peripheral resistance. Peripheral resistance comes in three forms: thickness of the blood, length of the blood vessel, and then of course the diameter of that blood vessel. Alright, so bottom of that page there is a blank for you to fill in. We've talked about this before. Well, what is the control mechanism for that vessel diameter? Where does the control originate? Good, vasomotor center. Where is that vasomotor center located? Medulla oblongata, good. So that's how we can control the vessel diameter.
Blank. What it said is what portion of the brain provides control over diameter.
I don't remember that. I'm gonna study for that.
Okay, let's go over to page 57 and talk about short-term mechanisms to control our blood pressure. So what are the three factors that influence peripheral resistance?